listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to XBOsoft's webinar, Trashing Your Risk, Improving Your Intuitive Risk Management Skills with Michael Daydorf. First of all, just a little bit about XBOsoft. We are a software testing firm. We've been around since 2006. We offer software quality assurance, and we are a global company across North America, Europe, and Asia. To introduce you to our speakers, we have myself, who does all the marketing for XBOsoft. We have Jan Prinsen, one of the boards of XBOsoft, and we also have guest speaker Michael Daydorf. Hi, Jan. Hi, Michael.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi, Sabrina. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Michael, I noticed you operate a B&B in Pennsylvania, and I was wondering how your risk management skills have helped you in managing the B&B.
Well, a lot more contingency planning, I think. For example, when we know that the season's going to be slow, which we're tied to a bike trail, so we're tied to bicycling season. Right now it's about, -8 Celsius out there. So it's a little chilly for bicycle riding, not in the Netherlands, but here definitely. Anyway, so there's no bicycle riders, so we manage some of the risk of that by planning special winter specials. We also do a lot of risk management around the area of budget, managing the budget for the place. We're continually evaluating and reevaluating different ways to keep the expenses down while we still keep the quality up. And since we have a reputation of being kind of a high-end place, and trust me on that one, but you can read my TripAdvisor, that's another risk that we manage very carefully. We monitor all the ratings that come in from customers who've stayed here, and if there's even a hint that someone wasn't happy, we do something about it right away to try and fix it. So that's kind of back to that intuitive approach that I'm going to talk about as we go on today.
Super. Well, let's get started. I'm very interested to hear about your risk management skills and how you apply them to software. We're ready.
Well, I did a number of risk identification workshops for different companies and different U.S. government agencies. So I've done risk, and also in private industry, at Computer Sciences Corporation, at Lucent Bell Labs, which for Ford Motor Company, Xerox, as well as the Army, the Navy, Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard. Anyway, I did risk identification sessions there. One of our most successful interventions was with a project that had had three consecutive late releases with poor quality in the releases. They had a number of process problems that came out during the risk analysis. They also had just some scheduling problems, and they had some organizational problems in the groups that were providing the requirements were overloaded, so they were always getting the requirements into the team late, which started them off behind the 8 ball. They weren't realizing how much their lateness was contributing to the other problems. So they part of the risk thing was getting the organization to realign, and there were 3 organizations involved. There was a contractor developing the software. There was a group developing the requirements and fielding the software, same group. And there was another group responsible for monitoring the contract and managing the technical architecture. One of the main outcomes of the risk thing is we implemented a team risk management process where the end customer, the provider, and the owner of the development effort work together. Now, for you guys in the Agile world, that's like business as usual, okay? Yeah, we got someone who represents the customer. They're part of our development team. But at that point in development, that was a very unusual approach to have them intimately involved. And to get the actual contractor to open up and say, yeah, here's areas where we've identified risks and we're not quite sure how to solve them and we need your help. That was also quite radical, getting the customer to say, here's problems I'm having, and the person paying for it saying, here's problems I'm having, and I need your help to manage them. So the team risk management led to 3 consecutive on-time releases, with each release clocking better quality, and it actually resulted in an easing off on the requirements process, kind of again anticipating agile methods, because what they said is, hey, wait a minute, we're putting everything in because we're assuming we're going to get it late. If we back off and only put in the really important things, prioritize your stories, guess what? We'll get the really important things, and we'll get them on time with good quality, and the actual throughput of the whole system will be higher. So, that good example for you?
That's a great example. Thanks.
And in fact, that one, if you look at, I will, at the risk of extremely oversimplifying, the major benefit to using agile methods is that you manage the risk of requirements change. And if you are in a system or environment where the requirements change rapidly, trying to nail down the requirements actually injects risk into the development system. So, a little philosophy there. Okay, you ready for next?
We're ready.
All right. So, you guys are missing the logo on the bottom, which talks about XBOsoft, and I apologize, I didn't get the right slides in time. What we're going to do is talk today about how you can do risk management intuitively, and in fact, you probably already are doing it. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to apply that to testing. I think you'll find the intuitive approach to risk management when you take it out of the realm of people with huge spreadsheets, although those can be very helpful, and you take it and just talk about, no, these are things that could go wrong, and here's what we can do. The communication process itself is a major risk mitigation factor. I developed a lot of this material while I was working at the Software Engineering Institute for Carnegie Mellon. There's a couple slides in the backup stuff which come directly from SEI materials, so if you use those slides, please give them credit. I'm going to start out by telling a story. This young feller in the picture here with the young lady sitting next to him works for somebody who's a lot like Dilbert's pointy-haired boss. And he has custody of this young lady here, and he's a single parent, and he has to get to work, and he's been diligently going to work, except for one little problem. He's been late a couple times. And pointy-haired boss came in and said, if you're late one more time in the next quarter, I'm going to fire you. So his problem, if you like, is getting to work. And the risk is getting there late. If he gets there late, there's this consequence that comes out there. So the risk is that he must be on time. So now, all of you in the audience have to get to work somehow. It may be a matter of putting on your robe and walking downstairs to the computer, or firing up the laptop, or you may be commuting across New York City in rush hour traffic. I don't know, but some way or other you have to get to work, and hopefully you don't work for that same pointy-haired boss who wants you there exactly on time. Well, Uncle Joe, the car salesman locally, offers to help. Now, for those of you who are kind of playing fast forward and looking, you're probably looking at that car saying, you couldn't drive that car on the road in my state or in my country because it would be illegal. And in fact, in most states in the United States now, you would not be able to drive that car, but at the time that initial picture was taken, yep, you could have rolled right down the road on that car, and people would have thought you were driving the car to work. So Uncle Joe offers to help, and this leads us to the first question in our intuitive risk management approach, which is based on 4 questions. What could possibly go wrong?
I guess the car could break down.
Okay.
Or we could get an accident because we can't see good through the window. Maybe it's not fast enough.
Not fast enough, yeah, that's a good one. What else could go wrong? We've talked about the car. Well, the car's not the only thing in the world. What else could go wrong?
Traffic. We have a lot of traffic. It takes more time than we expected.
Okay. Something.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Anything else comes to mind?
You could get lost.
Okay. Recently at the in Buffalo, New York, just north of us, about 100 miles, they hit 4 or 5 feet of snow. That wouldn't help either.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 meters of snow in 2 days usually does not help you get to work on time. The only advantage to that is the pointy-haired boss couldn't get there either, so you'd never know if you were on time or not, right? Okay. Well, those are some things that could go wrong. I'm going to show you a list. I do this as a brainstorming exercise for people. So, by the way, if anyone online, you want to type in a question at any point in time, please do that. If you have questions that you want to ask, go ahead and send them along, and we'll either stop and take the question, or later on we'll have a moment or two where we can answer some of the questions. If we don't get to them, we will send me an email and we'll get an answer to you as best we can after the presentation. This is some of the things that have come up in brainstorming sessions. They've talked about, well, you could get in an accident. You could have traffic problems. We mentioned those. Mechanical problems. And then there were people who said, hey, wait a minute, that car just totally lacks class. There's no way I'd even get in that car. What are you doing trying to think of getting a 2-year-old and putting her into that car? And then when you talk a little longer, they say, well, there's other things besides the car that could go wrong. You could sleep in, you could oversleep, you could have an illness. I know when I've gone and done workshops in places, I typically try and get in the day before, and I drive from the hotel to wherever the workshop is because I've been known to get lost. In this case, that wouldn't have been a risk, but it could be a risk. Okay. And then you ask, the question marks are just, there could be other things that would make you late for work. Okay. So that was quick and easy. We said, okay, what could go wrong? Boom, came up with a list. The broader your team is, the better your list will be. Okay, or the more complete your list will be. The next thing we say, okay, now we take some.
Michael, sorry to interrupt. If you say broader, do you mean multidisciplinary?
Excuse me.
You mentioned the broader the team there is, the more extensive your list is.
Oh, yeah, the more multidisciplinary or cross-cultural the team is, once they get into it, the more you'll see risks. And cultural fact, if you're doing international development, which I did a lot of reviews with Lucent, one of the things you find is that sometimes it's difficult to get people in other cultures to even participate fully in a risk mitigation session. You really have to spend some time just breaking down the barrier, because particularly, for example, well, when I was with Bell Labs, we went to China, and the Chinese are very reticent to admit that there might be a problem or even the potential of a problem. And they're particularly reticent to admit that when the company that's, is a foreign company. They definitely, it's difficult for them to do it within the Chinese culture. It's even more difficult for them to do it to someone from outside. So when we did risk sessions in China, you have to spend quite a while just to get people into the flow of things and try and translate things into something that would make sense to them. And when you work with teams with different cultures, each culture has its own risk tolerance. And so you have to be aware that one culture is going to raise a risk that's unique to them, but you still have to be sensitive to that. But usually a multidisciplinary team would help. If I was doing risks for development, and I didn't have someone representing test on the team, and I didn't have someone representing the actual installation group on the team, whoever's actually putting it out to the customer, okay, I would not feel I had a complete picture of the risks, period. Okay. So even if I was doing development only risks and it was early in the life cycle, those people need to be there.
Thanks.
Some of the risks that people catch go beyond the initial problem statement. So for example, we said getting to work on time was a risk, okay? But if you go back and look, what's the first thing on there? They say, well, involved in an auto accident. you know, and if I get in a car accident and my leg's broken, I'm more concerned about the broken leg than I am about getting to work on time, pointy-haired boss or not. Okay. Another example that happens is a lot of times you can group risks. So if you do this in a brainstorming session, people will have looked at that and said, oh, you could get a flat tire, the brakes could fail, the engine might not start, the car might have a radiator problem. They'll identify a whole bunch of things. From, if it's easier to deal with, you can group those things and say, yeah, I could have mechanical problems. What can I do, you know, to group things if there are things that I can address in a similar way? Okay. I mentioned the different people have different ideas and tolerances for risks, and I also mentioned that's cultural, that it's the other thing is that there's a tendency when you're doing risk management to focus on urgent things. By the way, to a risk manager, the definition of a risk is a problem is it's a risk where the probability has gone to 1. So if you have something that's imminent, that's causing problems for your team right now, the best thing to do is grab those things and pull them out of risk management and identify them and manage them differently to management. But during a risk session, you will almost invariably encounter at least one problem. Okay, so you have to worry about that. Then the other thing is that risks are interrelated. The mechanical condition of the car makes it more likely that I will get into an accident than if I drove a new Mercedes off the lot. Okay. And so there's some quick thoughts about just risks when you do identification. There is an assumption that comes out of that, which is you can mitigate the risks. You can do something about them. People online following along with me here? Our hero has still got to get to work, so the next question is, what can we do about it? So Jan, you got any ideas on that?
I guess he could go regular checkups for his car, work on maintenance. In the Netherlands, we have a yearly inspection of a car, or 2 yearly inspection of new cars.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we could prepare driving a car that is not that good, training, train in bad weather conditions.
Okay, those are all good examples. People online, you thinking about that? Thinking about what else you could? What could you do about the risk of getting to work just oversleeping? Jan, what would you do to make sure you don't oversleep?
Go to bed early. Set an alarm clock.
Right, you set an alarm clock. When you travel, do you ever set 2? You set one when you bring one along, and then you set your phone to wake you up as well?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. and then I tell the hotel to give me a phone call as well, and then I can't sleep because I'm worried about when the alarm's going off. Okay. Yeah, well, so in the past, here's some things that people have come up with. Risks involved with an auto accident. Insurance, driver training usually helps to reduce the thing. Maintaining the vehicle, having a cell phone. Traffic problems, we have radio reports. Have a couple alternate routes. Leave your home, set up a home office. Make sure you always leave early to go. By the way, that's kind of tough to do if you have a 2-year-old. I don't know if any of you have tried to get a 2-year-old moving in the direction that you want them to get into, but
I've wanted all. I know.
Yeah. I had one person who flew a lot, and the guy was a bit of a process control nut. He had 3 alternative routes to the airport, and he had done statistical measurements on the different routes 20 times each at different times of day to make sure that he could always predict accurately what his time to the airport was. I thought that was a little over the top, but, you know, what can I say? Mechanical problems, maintain the vehicle, have a roadside assistance plan. I don't know if you guys have something like this in the Netherlands where you call the company and they come and tow you and it discounts the rate of the tow, or they come and fix a flat on the side of the road.
Yeah, we do.
Vehicle inspections is a risk mitigation. Notice the inspection is not something that I'm doing. It's something that the government got so tired of people driving around in cars like this that at some point there was enough outcry and they said, oh, you know what? Everybody's car's got to pass a minimal inspection. They got to have good headlights, good brakes, windshield wipers. There's a few basic things that need to be checked on everybody's car. Most states in the United States have that. I know almost every country, and I don't know of any countries in Europe that do not. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to talk about these risks, these mitigations a little bit, because there's some things when you start looking at that, and this is going to get ahead a little bit to the next slide, but I'll talk about it while we're on this one. Notice maintaining the vehicle pops up in more than one place. That's an example of the mitigation strategy or method may affect more than one risk. That's actually pretty common. You may be able to get a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1. So like, for example, doing early testing on a product may reduce the risk of having defects later. And it may reduce the risks of having performance defects if you can tailor some of that early testing, as well as having functional defects later on. And if your early testing is done and includes some reviews and maybe some static analysis, you may be able to reduce risks across a variety of different types of testing later on. And that's an example in the testing world. Having insurance, now, back to our original problem was get to work. Does having insurance help me get to work?
No.
What does it do?
Helps you for healthcare or costs for car repair.
Helps for the cost of the car repair if there's an accident. So you notice we started out with the idea we're going to get to work and we're going to get there on time, but it drifted a little bit. And as we were talking about the risks, we said, oh, you know, gee, we get in an accident, we could get hurt, we need insurance to cover that, to cover the cost of the accident, to reduce the impact of that. So that's a risk mitigation strategy that we put in, but it has nothing to do with the original problem. And the fact is risks are often interrelated, and the mitigations are interrelated. So you may start out talking about getting to work on time and end up talking about having a cell phone so I can call, okay? Now, or having insurance to reduce the cost impact of a thing. Those are all good things that come out of a risk session. So you don't rule them out. Don't say, hey, that's out of scope. We were talking about getting to work on time. That's not related to getting to work on time. No, it's important. You need to deal with it. You need to do something about it. Okay. Can't do anything about the car lacking class. Just that's the car. Don't ride it. Last one is I point out sometimes you get a risk and it introduces new risks. And I'll give a couple examples of that. One here, and this comes up, okay? Now, these are all things we talked about. Some strategies address multiple risks. No single strategy addresses them all. By the way, they all take time and money. Some of the mitigation activities introduce new risks. There's a game you can play called the So But game. I might get involved in an auto accident. So, I bought insurance. But the insurance cost more money than I had. So, I got a second job. But I was so tired, I swerved and got a ticket. So I worked more hours. And I was still tired, so I stayed home and slept in. So I missed my job. And so you see how that goes, where the mitigation of actually working extra to get the insurance could cause or contribute to another risk, which is driving fatigue. So for example, this little cartoon came up. Here's a guy asleep, crashed into the tree. Unfortunately, no law against driving after doing triple shifts, which is true. And here's another one that's related to the cell phone. There's a person in the car with the airbag. Hey, can I call you back? At this point, the cell phone has become a detriment. I know most countries have rules against cell phone. Again, this is one of the things most states in the United States have rules against cell phones or restrictions on how. However, it's one of the most disobeyed rules around, and it does contribute to a lot of accidents. Okay. All right, so we've asked two questions. The first question was, what could go wrong? The second risk question was, what can we do about it? And the next one is a little more subtle. It says, what should we do about it? There's always choices. And the question is, how do you choose? Because you're not going to be able to mitigate every risk, just like you're not going to be able to test every possible combination of inputs in testing. You're not going to be able to test every single thing. So you're not going to be able to pay for infinite risk mitigation. All right? So how do you choose? Well, the answer is you do some analysis. Now, risk analysis can be very formal, and for a lot of people who teach risk management, this is the focus of the whole thing. And you have big honking spreadsheets, and you have a lot of statistical data, and you do statistical simulations, and all of those things are absolutely wonderful if you have the resource to do it. And I'll give you an example when that would work. If I'm an insurance company, and you come to me and say, I'm driving a brand new Corvette, red, with the biggest engine they make for it, brand new red Mercedes convertible, biggest engine they make, okay, and I'm 22 years old. They can look in their database and say, red Mercedes costs this much to fix, new Mercedes costs this much more, driver age 21 to 25 gets in this many more accidents, the red car is typically involved in accidents more than a white car or black car. Yes, this is true. Okay, there's something about the red car either fuels an aggressive temperament, or an aggressive temperament tends to buy more red cars. So red cars get in accidents more than white cars or silver cars. So you can do all that stuff, and you can spit out a number, and you can calculate what the risk is to you, the insurance company, the financial risk, and you use that to set the premiums, at least in the U.S. So that's the case where using statistics, using large databases of past data, can help you to do better risk analysis or more thorough risk analysis. But guess what? Most of the time we don't have access to that kind of data. And so we're stuck doing something else. And in this case, you know, what should our hero do? This young feller back on slide number 2 with the kid that needs to support the kid and needs to get to work. What should he do? Well, using the intuitive approach, and we have our long list, and say, should we do all of these things? And the quick answer is you need to do the most important things, and you need to do a little bit of analysis to help decide which are most important. So for risk analysis, typically in software world, you're looking for tools to help prioritize the risks, identify your critical follow-up actions. What do you need to do to track to make sure the risk isn't happening? For example, if you do maintenance, so I take my car down to the garage, I get the windshield fixed, I get the brakes updated, I put on new tires, I'm done, right? Don't I have to do it again? Ever. No. It doesn't work like that. I need to check back in later. That's why the annual inspection. Those things are going to wear out. The profile is going to change. Time is going to change things. And I need to balance my acceptable level of risk against the cost of mitigation, particularly for our hero back there. Doesn't have a lot of money, or he wouldn't be talking to Uncle Joe, the used car dealer. He'd be driving off the lot in that new Mercedes, and things would be a little different. So the first thing that you do for basic risk analysis is you look at the probability or likelihood of the risk happening. And usually for the type of stuff we do in software, you come up with some criteria and you say, this is high, this is medium, and this is low. And keep in mind, people are lousy at estimating probability. And you folks out there online, there may be one or two professional poker players out there. For you, I take it back. For everybody else, you're probably lousy at estimating probability, unless you've spent a whole lot of time working in that space. So high, medium, low is usually about as good as you can get, particularly in a noisy system space like doing software development. Then the next thing that you do is estimate the cost or impact. And you could translate that cost of impact into latent defects, so quality problems the customer might see. You could translate that into dollars. You could translate it into time. You could spend a little effort, translate a schedule slip into a cost number that you could show to management. So you say, hey, look, if we don't get this new testing tool and we don't get it installed, we're going to end up slipping development or not finishing the testing using the new tool, so we're not going to catch all the defects, and it's going to end up slipping our schedule by a month. We slip the schedule a month, we got 20 people on the team, here's how much it costs you. By the way, the customer will be mad. So this is the type of informal analysis, but you can quantify it if you have the time and someone's willing to go through the work. Typically, you would use a simple exposure table like this. Exposure is a risk term from the finance industry where they take the probability of the risk times the impact expressed in dollars, and that equals exposure. That's what insurance companies do. What we do is take the probability of the risk times the impact, and we call it the magnitude to make sure we don't fool people into thinking we're going to be putting dollars and cents on this. And you have a simple table where you multiply the probability times the impact, and you get these numbers. When you do this with the risks, and you do it in a small group, it'll give you a measure of how important the risk is. And then what you do is you do it both before and after you do your mitigation planning. So a quick way to do this, you have your 4 or 5 people on your team that identified the risks, go through and score the risks individually, discuss them as a team, rescore them, because sometimes there's a different interpretation, then just take the average. Things that pop up in the 6 to 9 range, those are things that are important you need to be tracking and managing. The other items you may want to keep an eye on, particularly things that have high impact, even though the probability is very low, but you wouldn't necessarily have to do anything about it right away. Okay? So the next question is, what will we do? So we have 4 questions. What could go wrong? What can we do? What should we do? Now we've prioritized. We've picked our top few items. By the way, I leave for an exercise for you folks online. What should the young feller back at the beginning do? I think maintaining the car and getting insurance and leaving early are probably the best bets for him. Okay, in a car like that, you'd want to allow a little extra travel time, like Jan said. It might be kind of slow. And the question about what will we do has a lot to do with what your management culture is, what your team culture is. Fundamentally, what you want to do is take the risks, the top ones, and put them into some sort of risk management plan that can be part of your project management. There's some things you can do in the Agile world. We'll talk about that to manage risks that are short. Refactoring is an example of risk management. Okay? So you folks out in the Agile world, you do 3 or 4 iterations, 3 or 4 sprints. You get to sprint number 5, you say, yeah, I know they got more stories for us to do. I know they got more stuff for us to do in this sprint. But some of that stuff we did before isn't going to hold up if we put more users on. It isn't going to hold up if we make these changes. We need to refactor the database, or we need to reconsider the architecture a little bit in this next sprint, or stuff's going to start breaking. That's risk management. Okay? All right. When you're thinking about what you will do, you need to think about what might prevent you from following through, what you could do to ensure that you follow through. Quick answer, including risk management and project management, but again, that depends on your goals. Keep it practical, use analysis to set the priorities, and then ask the question, what can we afford and what do we have time to do? Now, I've been talking about getting to work and getting to work on time, but I also I often talk when I do this about personal fitness and health. Okay? So it's amazing to me how many people still smoke cigarettes. That is a high-risk behavior. It's amazing to me how many people are very overweight. That's a high-risk behavior. Don't trust me on that. Go look it up, okay? I'm not trying to but the fact is, this question here about what will we do is really the more of the stumbling block. It's easy to say, go to your doctor, and your doc says, hey man, you got to quit smoking. You got to cut the alcohol back to, like 2 or 3 beers a day instead of 2 or 3 six packs. And while you're at it, you might consider getting some exercise. But actually implementing a plan that you can follow through that starts out slowly. A lot of people get, every year around January, you see people in the gym. And by February, you don't see them there anymore. And what happens is they come in, they work out too hard, they get sore, they injure their knee or whatever, and then they don't come back. So this is the quick question about what will we do, what should we do. That's why the last 2 questions are in there. You're not going to be able to do everything, and you're going to have to do it in some kind of moderation to make it work. Okay? So this is the summary, the intuitive approach based on 4 questions. What could go wrong? What can we do? What should we do? And then what will we do? And that's where you have to put a little management oomph or follow-up action behind it. All right. So that's the approach in a nutshell. Let's shift for a little bit and talk about testing. Any of you in testing ever feel this way, kind of like you're out somewhere off on the rear staircase and not really paid attention to? I don't know if that's ever happened to you. One of the things I'll point out is that the type of product you make, and this is one breakout, there's a bunch of other. You could say, break down products in different ways. You could say, oh, this is a high reliability product. This is a high performance product. It's a website that's going to get 10 million hits a day. This is a product that's critical to making investments. We're going to win or lose millions of dollars based on how well we do this analysis. This is a product that navigates a spaceship between here and someplace. This is a throwaway app that we put on the cell phone for people attending a conference. Those are all different. A use and lose product, you do it once, people use it. It's like an advertising special web page. Done. Short, simple, mass-produced, put it out. If it's wrong, you fix it real time. If you can't fix it, you go, oh, oops, sorry about that. One and done, custom-built product with no follow-up support. So the customer comes to you, usually this would be done with a contract, and they say, build me a system that does X. Or better yet, install your system you've already built and tailor it to my needs and have it do this. I used to, when I worked at Lucent, we had a billing system that was developed by Keenan Systems. And they had developed the billing system, and effectively they had set it up as a one-and-done system. They had ways to tailor it for you. Once they tailored it and turned it over to you, they did not do software maintenance. There was no follow-up support available through Keenan. They would provide you with bug fixes. That was it. So if you needed enhancements, you needed additional tailoring. Their marketing strategy was they didn't have the resource to do that, so they would turn it over to a partner of theirs. So you could hire EDS or Accenture or IBM or one of those companies to come in and do all the follow-on work, or they would give you enough of the information, the interface information that you could develop your own using your own in-house team. But it was a one and done. They didn't do anything after that. More often, in this case, it was built and operated. That they turn over. You could turn over operations to a partner, and this I think probably fits a little more with some of the stuff you guys do. Or you build and enhance. It's an iterative product with multiple releases, like the system I was talking about earlier where they ran into all the quality problems. Sometimes a product is a giveaway. My email service is a giveaway. AOL bought Netscape. AOL is happy to give me free email as long as they get to put their advertising panel up on the side and give me advertising. Google is happy to let me use their browser as long as they get to track where I go and then tailor advertising to me. Each of those products has different risks. So when you think about how your product is going to have risk and what you're going to do in testing, remember the purpose of testing is to reduce the risk that the product has an unacceptable level of defects when it goes out, when people start using it. So testing itself is a risk mitigation strategy. and we can ask for testing. What could possibly go wrong? And this is actually a question I'd actually like to get some inputs from you guys. So Jan, is there any way to get people to send stuff into us real time?
Yeah, guys, you can use the chat panel on the right side of the screen.
Okay, folks out there, come on, this is your chance to show me that you're awake. Always tough on a webinar to keep people interested. So give me some, what could go wrong with testing?
Any ideas, people? Not enough time for testing, resources for testing. What happened? Maybe they're a bit shy.
We getting anything over the line and I'm just not seeing it?
No, they're not getting in.
They're not sending stuff in. Oh, no, that's a risk. We can just sit on this slide for the next, I don't know, 15 minutes. Somebody out there's got something to say.
I think we're getting something in. Testing gaps by Sandpad.
Say again?
Testing gaps.
Okay.
Test coverage.
Test coverage. I don't claim to have a complete list, but here's some things that I've noted in the past. Test strategies don't match the product. So you've got something that needs to be high reliability or high performance, and you don't have a way of testing that. Insufficient resources. I've seen a case where you had a high performance product, they didn't have a test strategy. They said, oh, gee, we need to test performance, and they needed to develop a test bed. Or they needed to implement a new test tool that could produce the kind of input volume that they needed to do performance testing, to do load testing. And they didn't have the money and the budget to buy it or the time to install it and bring it up and test the testing tool. That was a case where the two things worked together to compound the risk. Incomplete testing, that's a test coverage issue that was mentioned. Did you say test debt? Did I get that right?
Gaps, as in the gap.
Okay.
Sorry, we've got another one, budget allowance by Sharon.
Okay, both good. Wrong tools and methods, often a case. No automation, too much automation. Those items that you guys have identified, by the way, those are things where you should be asking the question, so what can we do about this? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about undocumented testing just because it's kind of counterintuitive. I was doing an architecture review and we had testers in the team, and it was an interim review. They had just finished a big release. They had some quality problems. They were struggling to get it out on time. They did. They were doing a retrospective coupled with risk management to get ready for the next release. And there was a lady from the test team there, and she said, we really didn't have enough time, that's one of the resources, to do all the testing we needed to do. So one of the things we did is we did as much testing as we could. We did more testing than we actually documented, and that's a risk. And we went on through the review, and then later on she said, no, this is my #1 priority thing because we did more testing than we documented. And to me, I'm naive. I looked at that, and it's like, so you did extra. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with doing more than you put down? And but something raised the little flag, and I said, obviously, I don't understand this because that sounds like a good thing. What's wrong with that? She said, well, this customer is in a regulated environment, and if the product fails, they get fines. And our contract says if we can't show we did due diligence and tested something related to the type of failure, we have to pay the fines. we share in the fines. So there was a huge financial risk, even though the test team had been doing as much as they could, and they had a lot of experience with this type of communication system, so they probably did a pretty good job testing. And they knew what to look for, but because they didn't write it down, they didn't have time to say, this is what we tested and this is what the results were. They didn't have time to capture that. Case, by the way, of not having enough automation. There was no way to go back and say, yeah, we tested that. So we were just hung out to dry. If something went wrong there, we couldn't show we had done any diligence at all in doing the test in that particular system. So I don't know if that would ever occur to you guys out here. Unclear criteria, not knowing what's good enough. Having an uncooperative development and management team, I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it is a major risk that I have seen with testing. Hopefully someone's chuckling online and saying, yeah, maybe I saw that once or twice. As a side effect of that, sometimes the testers lose control of the test process. So I've seen cases where they would put totally unrealistic schedules on the testing, and then they would compress the schedule, and then you get a thing where you just do the math and say, here's how many test cases we're able to run per hour with this test team, and this is the number of test cases we have, and guess what? We're not going to get there until 3 weeks after the scheduled release. So that's a problem, especially when you're not doing developmental testing early on, when the testing is a throw over the wall type thing. That's another wrong process type thing. So if any of these hit home to you, the next question that you would ask is pick one of these and say, what can we do about it? So if you were out there and you put something down, okay, now put on here and say, what could we do to fix this, to make this risk less likely to happen? And also, this is the point where you should ask yourself, is this something that's happened on the last 3 releases? Is it something that's kind of built into the way we're doing business? Because if it is, it's a problem. It's not a risk. That's not saying you shouldn't deal with it. It's just saying it's a problem. Because if it happened 3 releases in a row and you haven't changed anything, it's probably going to happen on release 4 too. Okay, so that's something that you need to ask yourself. So, Jan, for one of the things that you identified, what would you do?
Well, we could hire, if there's not enough testing, we could hire more testers.
Okay, and what new risk would that introduce?
We would have to spend more money. We would have to train them. The team may not be as quick as they were before.
Okay, you might actually lose schedule time as a result of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a timing factor there about when that risk mitigation would want to occur. Would you want to do that in the last 2 weeks of a cycle?
No.
Okay. And that's, we mentioned this earlier on. Okay, so hiring more testers, or have you ever done things where you like borrow testers from another group and then you don't have quite the same training?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and kind of share. That might be a way to get a few people in to help right now. So give me another risk that you had.
Well, one of the risks we have, let's see what the audience said. Maybe we can talk on testing coverage.
Okay. Other thoughts on that? Will that introduce any new risks?
Well, we could solve testing coverage by creating more test cases. Creating more test cases takes more time, which will leave us less time for other things.
Okay, and as you create more test cases for coverage, right? Here's a question for you. Okay, and by the way, there's a whole group that does what's called risk-based testing. Are you ever going to have 100% coverage?
No.
No, you're not.
No.
Okay. So how do you pick which things you need to develop those extra test cases for? And
go ahead.
Do you have any ideas on that?
somewhat similar tooling like you provided earlier, risk analysis?
Yeah, you can actually do a risk analysis of the product itself. And here's a couple things that you could look at there. You could develop extra test cases in areas that in the past were particularly problem prone. Usually you know which pieces of the code are fragile, and if you know you're going in to change one of those pieces of code, then you say, okay, let's put a little extra work doing test cases here. If it's unprecedented code, you want to put a little extra work on the initial test case design there. And the other thing is if it's high-risk code, and by high risk, I'm talking about things that could cause major, and I'll actually kind of punt on this, customer visible problem, okay? It's one thing if the system fails on boot up, because you're going to see that real early on. You're going to see that before it ever leaves and gets released, usually. And usually that's something that you can fix relatively quickly. And by the way, since you can't get past boot up, all the resources are going to focus on it anyway. What's even more scary is something that goes out in the field, and then when the customer invokes some particular thing, it causes errors, or the system crashes, or it interacts with some other system that it needs to interact with. So Keenan Billing Systems, for example, causes an error in the financial system that you're deploying it, that it's supposed to work with. That financial system is pulling billing information out. If that interface doesn't work right, that financial system goes haywire, and bad things happen, and customers get really upset, okay? If it's something where it's just going to be a little screen tweak, that's not as important. So a risk-based prioritization of your testing time and effort and how many test cases you develop is another way to improve your testing strategy overall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
We're hitting 55 minutes here.
All right, so we are pretty much done. The what should we do, and this is one thing I would say, during analysis, depending on how large your project is, okay, you should always start out by identifying and communicating the risk. And I mentioned this to Jan in an earlier discussion, but one of the ways to do this is with each retrospective, if you guys are doing some sort of agile method, at the end of each iteration or sprint, there's typically a minor retrospective. You may also have an architecture effort that goes through in some sort of parallel thing where you have periodic reviews. At those reviews of the architecture or at the retrospective for a sprint or a major build where you combine a lot of stories and do an actual release, you do a retrospective. That's a great point to add a little bit onto the retrospective and say, okay guys, what could go wrong? We identified things where we could improve, but what are the risks in the next one? Some of those will have already come out because you will have already identified areas to improve. Some of those things will be new that are related to the new feature set. So you do a little look ahead and look back at the same time and say, what are the risks for the next few sprints, for the next few iterations, cycles, whatever your terminology for that is. And then communicate that risk throughout the team. That is the biggest mitigation factor right there, is talking about the risk. Because as soon as you start doing that, people are more likely to bring it up as soon as things start to go haywire and not wait till the last minute thinking, well, gee, maybe we can fix this. Vendor's a little flaky delivering that tool. He's a week late, but we don't need to panic yet. We've still got 3 weeks before the drop dead. No, bring it up now. Make the managers earn their pay by making the phone calls to that vendor saying, hey, where the heck's my tool? Get it to me. I need it. Oh, yeah, you're going to give me extra training, right? Because you're late on this. You're going to bring in some people to help my team. Have them do their work. The next thing is to make management willing to act on it. You may need to do the extra step in the analysis by taking the high priority risks and translating some of those into dollars and time. That's kind of a secondary analysis step. You use the quick way to identify what the high priority items are, and then translate those risks into dollars and time. That will help get management's attention. You want to hire more testers? Cool. You got to prove to management that the cost of hiring those testers or bringing on the payroll is going to pay for itself in terms of reduced risk later on down the line. Otherwise, they're just going to say, can't afford it. But if you say to them, well, yeah, can't afford it, but the way we're going right now, we're going to run a month late, and you're going to have a team of 20 sitting around on their hands not doing anything, and it's going to cost you X. I'm asking for 2 more testers. That's going to cost you Y, right? And Y is less than X. That helps to make the argument and get the support for what you will do. Okay? The goal, trash those risks. Hopefully you guys got something interesting out of this. And I will tell you, the young feller back in the story is me. The 2-year-old that you saw back there is now 43, and she is a director for development effort for a major healthcare group in Texas, in our country. So things all worked out. We got to work at least often enough to get into college, and life is good.
So Uncle Joe's car works pretty well.
We didn't go with Uncle Joe's car. We picked another option. But Uncle Joe's car was one of the options. And we had some cars that weren't very different from that. But we found someone else with a more modern car and carpooled with them. So anyway, so that's the Uncle Joe. Yeah, we eliminated that risk from the get-go. Okay? Questions? Anybody?
Yeah, I think we have time for one question. We have a couple others, but we can handle those via email after the webinar. But we got a question from Dan, and we have about 1 minute left.
Okay.
And his question is, how do you assess opportunity risk, all the other things that could have been done instead of the testing that was done?
Okay, opportunity risk is one of those things that people talk about. Managers like it, okay? And the thing with the opportunity is, if you fail to act on an opportunity to earn extra revenue or to implement a shortcut or to implement an efficiency, right, there's a hidden cost to that. So that's really what opportunity risk is about. It's the positive side. It's saying, I had some opportunity, but I didn't act on it quickly enough. I didn't put the resource in. In a testing situation, really that would be the case where you didn't implement tools quickly enough or did not get full usage out of the tools or methods that you had option for. So for example, you're doing development, you're in Group A. Group B has implemented some neat, nifty tool, and they've implemented static analysis, okay? And they're using static analysis to improve their overall development process, and they're finding it reduces the number of test defects. But your team looks at it and for some reason or another decides that you can't do static analysis. Well, the real question there at the end of the cycle is, say, when is the opportune time that we should be implementing this new tool and technology, and try to phase it in. It may be out of cycle. That's one of the actual drawbacks to agile methods, is sometimes they get too rigidly into the time box cycles. And there are some things like architecture improvements, method improvements, tool improvements that almost always have to happen out of cycle because they don't line up smoothly with your development iterations. So the case there is where you're going to do some planning in advance and say, well, yeah, we can implement static analysis, but we're not going to get it in for this release. Let's start the training now and get the developers using the tool, get a team trying it on some of our old code, maybe the stuff we did in the last 2 releases, tuning the static analyzer to our product and type, and then figuring out the best way to implement the process. If we can't get it in for next sprint, we'll do it for the one after that. And that's the case where you actually have to invest some resource, peel someone off, get the tool, get this little parallel effort going, and doing it in a way that doesn't disrupt the current sprint, and just accepting the fact you're not going to get the full value of it. I worked on one system where they put in a major effort on test automation. Test automation is a real funny game, by the way. There are tremendous gains if it's done well, and the gains usually don't occur until after the project is 2 or 3 iterations down the road. So it's difficult to sustain management attention to it, and also to write really good test scripts. Now this has improved a lot with the tools, is essentially like writing more code. And one of the risks that you have is you write the wrong code, you write the wrong script. It needs to be debugged and reviewed and have errors associated, or you will not realize the full benefits of the tool. Okay, kind of a long roundabout answer, but hopefully at least triggered a couple ideas on that.
I'm sure it has. And let's handle the other questions via email after the webinar. And I want to thank you, and I think we should give it back to Sabrina for the close.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Sabrina?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys.
And thank you, Michael, for joining us as guest speaker for XPOSoft. A very enlightening talk. We will be sending you the links to the video version of this and the slides on SlideShare very shortly. So should you have missed any of this or want to forward this on to anyone else, you will receive that email very shortly. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Jan